Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Disclosure Project. Tonight, we begin at the edge of a cave. The air turns colder. The stone feels heavy, as though something unseen stirs within. For the Greeks, that watcher guarded the gates of Hades. For the Hopi, it was the ant people who once guided humanity through disaster. And in Tibetan whispers, it was the lords of Shambhala, the hidden city beneath the mountains. These are not random, scattered stories, but consistent echoes that travel across cultures and centuries. Again and again, cultures place their greatest fears and hopes in the mysterious shadows below. This leaves us with a question. Why did so many look downward, instead of to the stars for answers to survival and wisdom? But, before we begin, if you find yourself genuinely pulled towards stories of mystery, conspiracy and forgotten lore, please consider subscribing. And if you truly like tonight's story, a gentle press of the like button or a friendly comment goes a long way to keep these journeys coming. And now, we jump back into tonight's story. Boots press into brittle snow, their crunch carried by the wind like a second heartbeat. Above, a radio sputters with static, and then a sharp voice strains through the noise. It's December 1946, and Admiral Richard E. Byrd is leading Operation Highjump, the largest Antarctic expedition in recorded history. At first glance, it seems like exploration, a noble survey of frozen cliffs and endless ice. But the scale makes the scene unsettling. More than 4,700 men, 13 vessels and 33 aircraft descend on a land supposedly barren and incapable of supporting life. The sound of engines growls against a silence that should belong only to glaciers. To anyone present, it feels strange, as if Antarctica is being treated less like wilderness and more like a hostile battlefield. The days stretch into weeks. Whiteout storms blind pilots, temperatures bite through greatcoats, and snowdrifts swallow equipment meant to endure war. Mission planners expected these trials, but the men continue regardless, mapping coastlines, testing gear against the cold and establishing short-lived bases. Then the unexpected order arrives. Return. After only 2 months, the expedition ends, 8 weeks into a mission meant to last 8 months. Official documents cite unrelenting weather, equipment malfunctions, and the deaths of crewmen in accidents too severe to ignore. Some accept this as the complete truth. Others notice the suddenness of the withdrawal and hear in it something unspoken. Why bring an armada if the plan collapses so easily? Why risk the lives of thousands for so little gained? Byrd himself adds to the unfinished feel of the story. In interviews after the expedition, his words cling oddly in the air. He describes Antarctica as the land of everlasting mystery, and tells reporters it could one day supply resources for the entire world. In a Chilean newspaper, he goes further, hinting, "I'd like to see the land beyond the pole," calling it the centre of the great unknown. To a casual listener, they're poetic gestures, perhaps an explorer's flourish. Yet believers point to those phrases as carefully coded signals, a way of saying he had seen more than he should and could not speak openly. Others dismiss that idea and insist his language simply reflected icy mountains, hiding seams of coal and ore, not other worlds. The ambiguity leaves a space large enough for myth to settle. That space widened in later decades when a document claiming to be Byrd's diary surfaced. In calm, handwritten passages, it tells of a flight over the pole where his craft allegedly broke through clouds and descended into a lush valley, warmed by light that radiated without a sun. According to this account, advanced beings intercepted him there, giant aircraft guiding his own, and delivered a warning against nuclear weapons. The diary reads like a crafted novel, detailed and strange, and historians quickly labelled it a fabrication. Even so, it became central to Hollow Earth lore, embraced because it filled the void left by silence. If Antarctica hides nothing at all, Why did such words resurface decades later and gain followers who treat them as revelation? The question lingers like frost unthawed. 13 years after Operation Highjump closed in retreat, the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 arrived. More than a dozen nations signed, locking away entire sections of the continent from military activity. On the surface, the treaty appears practical: prevent Cold War rivals from clashing in a frozen desert and dedicate the land to science alone. Yet the strangeness of the timing unsettles some. Just a handful of years earlier, warships had prowled those same waters with resources enough to wage conflict. Why then would bitter enemies suddenly agree on restraint? Some whisper of hidden motives, suggesting this unusual unity masked an arrangement to conceal striking discoveries. A truce not over ice, but over what the ice might cover. Such suspicions gather fuel from modern tools that should clarify mysteries but often feed them instead. Satellite maps of the continent sometimes show blurred stretches where data strips vanish or remain covered by irregular clouds. Digital seams stitch across the screen, feeding theories of intentional erasure. Flight paths charted across polar space sometimes curve, avoiding entry into latitudes most travellers will never glimpse. Pilots describe magnetic oddities and compasses spinning crazily when flying close to the white horizon. At stations near the pole, rare reports surface of lights gliding just above the wasteland, appearing and vanishing with no storm to explain the glow. To skeptics, these are glitches and atmospheric tricks, images distorted by harsh conditions and deliberate technical compromise. To others, every blurred pixel, every restricted approach, every flash of unexplained light forms a mosaic hinting at a secret below. The rational counter weighs heavily and should not be ignored. Antarctica's weather is some of the harshest humans endure. Sub-zero gusts slam into aircraft wings, cloud banks stabilise suddenly into impassable walls, and icebergs close shipping lanes without warning. Accidents kill without discrimination, and their toll on Operation Highjump is recorded in loss. Equipment built for battle struggles against sub-freezing winds, making failure a question of when, not if. Photographs smudged and obscured can be traced back to simple imaging limits, not censorship. Scientists note that optical distortions caused by ice crystals and rapidly shifting atmospheric conditions explain much of the strange light seen above glaciers. To them, nothing extraordinary is needed. Antarctica itself, indifferent and brutal, provides adequate reason for caution, retreat, and secrecy. Yet where ordinary explanations calm some, for others they sharpen suspicion. Add together the wartime murmurings of Nazi explorations, persistent rumours of submarines disappearing in southern waters, underground lakes discovered beneath miles of trapped ice, and the fact that so few outsiders will ever travel freely across Antarctic interiors. The picture that emerges feels unstable, as if history bent under pressure and something slipped out of sight. Conspiratorial frameworks thrive in such gaps, when events end abruptly, when language refuses clear translation, when treaties arrive as sudden as snow squalls. Operation Highjump's abrupt end, Byrd's poetic interviews, the fabricated but beloved diary, the strange unity of Cold War rivals, the satellite irregularities, the restricted air corridors, all together, they blend sharp evidence with shadow. Picture an ordinary sailor crouched on the deck of a ship during Operation Highjump, clutching his coat against needle-driven snow while hearing orders cancel months of promises. To him, the retreat may have seemed like relief, a reprieve from a continent bent on their destruction. For others, it carried the thrill of something withheld, a secrecy too heavy for cold winds to sweep clear. In that stillness, imagination did what ice and silence invite. It created hidden valleys, lost kingdoms, and thresholds beneath the poles. Whether those images are inventions or not hardly matters to the human appetite for mystery. each ordinary explanation seems matched by an extraordinary interpretation, and balance between them has never fully tipped. And so Antarctica stands, a theatre of contradictions, an empty expanse that required armies to test it, a landscape where science confronts conditions so brutal it must withdraw, yet folklore insists the reason for retreat lies deeper. The soldiers left, the treaty locked doors, and the photographs carried mistakes of their time. Still, suspicion took root, because in lands where only machines and specialists can wander, absence becomes its own story. Antarctica remains the continent where every omission, every blurred line carries the weight of intention. It is here, where silence is thick enough to be felt, that rational exploration transforms into enduring rumour. The ice does not confess. It never explains why armies came or why among the storm's roar a radio may have carried words too fragile to survive into official record. And perhaps that silence itself is why the story endures, because in frozen absence, imagination builds entire worlds underground. Antarctica waits, a stage dressed in white, where mystery clings even after decades of exploration, and where the next unanswered signal may sound like myth rising once more. The sound of boots striking frozen ground echoes against the bite of polar wind. You can almost feel the sting in your own ears, harsh and unrelenting, as the year is 1938 and German explorers step out onto an Antarctic plateau. They plant swastika flags into ice crust that has stood for centuries, christening the land Neuschwabenland. On paper, their task is safe enough. Survey whaling grounds, chart unmapped coastlines, bring back data for the Reich's industrial planners. Yet the crates they carry, the instruments they unpack, tell a story not so neatly aligned with whales. Their equipment included devices not needed for mere surveys, radios meant for long-range communication, and gear to scan terrain far beneath the surface. It was as if their focus lay elsewhere, below the snow, in tunnels no one had admitted existed. The air above them thins into a sky that reflects no answers. It only absorbs the sound of flags flapping above untouched ice. The party was led under the banner of science, enough to calm critics and satisfy allies. Still, the deeper pulse of the expedition belonged to the Ahnenerbe, a research institute that was never quite what it appeared to be. Established within the Nazi state, the Ahnenerbe outwardly draped itself in the folds of anthropology and folklore collecting. Yet its real projects reached beyond academic curiosity. Teams under its direction travelled across Tibet, tramped through South American jungles, probed the polar extremes, all searching for what official documents never fully confessed. They sought lost origins, artifacts from civilizations older than memory, and confirmation of beliefs that blurred into the mystical. To the men pressing their signatures onto expedition logs, anthropology was a veil. Behind it, the drive was occult learning, hidden power that might be claimed, and roots of destiny to validate a regime built on dangerous fantasies. Each shipment of skull-measuring tools or chant recordings bound the improbable to state policy. In that web of pursuits, the Ahnenerbe pressed against a line between science and belief. Its expeditions into Tibet are perhaps most striking. On the surface, photographs show German teams politely interacting with monks, their tents pitched against high mountain ridges. Less politely, the visitors recorded liturgies and measured skull dimensions, convinced they could chart an unbroken thread to something lying beneath stone-cold monasteries. Ideologues in Berlin wanted nothing less than confirmation that Aryan ancestors lived under those peaks, perhaps not only in some forgotten age, but possibly still. Some whisper that legends of subterranean races dwelling beneath sacred mountains seem to line up too neatly with Nazi obsessions. The chants, captured on reel-to-reel tape, formed soundscapes entangled with ideology. Facts disappeared into an imaginative geography where the Himalayas kept hidden masters beneath their snow. A monk scribbling prayers in a cloth-wrapped book became to these men a sentry to caverns, not simply a caretaker of scripture. The fragile line between spiritual guardianship and fabricated racial destiny blurred. Flowing inside the party framework were even stranger threads. Groups like the Thule Society and the Vril Society seeded much of this obsession. Born of mystical currents before the Nazis rose, these circles nursed preoccupations with hidden races, forgotten energy sources, and contact with superior beings believed to reside under the crust of the earth. The Vril stories spoke of a coming race with access to energy that could heal or destroy with equal ease. Thule carried nationalist longings made mystical, promising not only heritage but guidance from ancient masters. As the ideology hardened into state religion, these societies braided themselves into policy ambitions. The old myth of Agartha, a subterranean world beyond Himalayan valleys, twisted into a racial destiny equated with power. For the Reich, the underground was not some fable for solace. It was recast as both origin and arsenal, a geography below turned into political weapon above. The very soil underfoot became imagined proof of superiority, the hidden population made into allies for domination. Once that framework was in place, Neuschwabenland grew more than symbolic. Rumours filtered out after the war, pointing toward facilities not recorded on clean maps. Whispers claimed German engineers hollowed caverns from walls of Antarctic ice, carving structures meant to house supplies, aircraft and possibly prototypes difficult to explain in official archives. Whether true or not, the idea captured imaginations. German precision brought down upon a wilderness until it transformed into hidden habitations. In this telling, the region ceased to be a frozen emptiness. Instead, it became a vault of advanced laboratories, not marked by chimneys or wires above ground, but by tunnels leading downward. Some whispers even insist such bases were designed to reach hidden corridors extending into the earth itself, bridging ideology with myth. Beneath blankets of snow, steel met stone in silence. Supporters of this view argue that so swift an Allied interest in Antarctica after 1945 was no coincidence. Perhaps the ice concealed evidence not suitable for open record. Adding to the unease are rumours of Hitler himself, stories that reframe his final hours. Official accounts end in a bunker in Berlin. Post-war tales sketch a stranger exit. In these retellings, the Führer does not burn in ruin, but travels south, not only to Argentina as common fugitive tales suggest, but further into Antarctic caverns. There, say these whispers, ancient civilizations awaited, prepared to welcome their surface allies. The vision is stark, a defeated leader joining subterranean hosts in stone chambers beneath the pole. For believers, this closes the gap between history undone and fantasy fulfilled. For critics, it is nothing but fable spun after war's trauma. Yet the silence of extreme frontiers leaves room where certainty cannot fully settle. Even fantasy has power when official silence surrounds it. The notion that Nazism survived beneath ice still floats across conspiracy lore. A figurehead transferred from surface ashes to underground halls. Strands of evidence or imagination layered on imagination continue with technology itself. Within the Vril Society's mysticism lay fascination for possible energy sources unclaimed by modern science. Sources said to power ships that ignored gravity and engines that required no fuel. To intertwine this with military intent was not difficult. Underground sanctuaries became pictured not as shrines of wisdom, but chambers of design, producing crafts later glimpsed in strange reports. In this reading, the ideological quest turned hollow earth ideas into carriers of power, not refuge, but arsenal. Where once Agartha was rumoured as a radiant city beneath peaks, now it became metaphor for a weapons vault meant for select hands. One could almost hear chants in Tibetan temples transfigured into test signals for machines. Beliefs about ascended masters transmuted into what some called advanced guidance systems. Ancient myths stretched unwittingly into blueprints crafted by secret committees. This merging of occult whispers with engineering ambition wound the myth tighter into politics. Skeptics, of course, counter these claims. They point to the Antarctic expedition of 1938 as mostly a publicity stunt. In their records, the mission charted miles of coast, dropped markers, and filed impressive, widely photographed reports as propaganda fodder for the Reich. The Ahnenerbe, though dressed in academic robes, supplied more ideology than evidence, producing a blend of pseudoscience that misused real cultures for fantasy. The bases whispered post-war may have been nothing more than mapping camps or inflated tales passed through hearsay. Yet even these critics find it harder to explain why, so soon after 1945, Allied powers mobilised massive resources toward Antarctica, launching military operations in hostile weather far from war zones. Perhaps coincidence explains all of it. But some supporters glance at the timing and wonder what precisely drove such interest. What did the Allies think they might encounter? Sometimes absence of answers builds more than archives can. Layering onto this are the mysteries of submarines. German U-boats recorded as vanishing in southern waters gave rise to suspicions they had not all fallen to wartime pursuits. Could some have carried personnel and equipment away from collapsing Europe towards southern refuge? Allied reports of advanced aircraft near polar regions added to the unease, some describing crafts that seemed to outpace known technology of the time. For believers, these became not scattered mishaps, but proof of hidden engineering continued underground. The apparent gaps in post-war technology, where ideas surfaced abruptly without clear progression, fueled arguments that devices were already in use beneath Antarctic snow. To hear whispers of lights dancing above ice shelves, or machines unaccounted for by industry, was to imagine an underground hangar humming with energy extraction. The submarines, silent in their disappearance, float across this mythology not as wrecks but as carriers to another front unseen by most. The picture that forms is grim rather than mystical. Where Greek tales imagined Hades as afterlife and Tibetan texts pictured Shambhala as sanctuary, the Nazi appropriation twisted underground spaces into theatres of control, race, and weaponry. This shift is perhaps the most unsettling aspect. The Hollow Earth idea, once an improbable curiosity, became absorbed into the machinery of political ambition. It ceased to be heritage for wonder and became framework to justify conquest. Data collection in Tibet was cast as racial validation. Facilities rumoured in Antarctica became backup plans for Empire's continuation. Mystical energy of the Vril was inverted into schematics for future craft. Each layer moved further away from human striving toward enlightenment and deeper into human hunger for dominance at any cost. The myth descended from spiritual possibility into ideological arsenal, as if the earth underneath became less a place of refuge and more a factory for menace. Even now, scattered accounts tease at the edges. Fishermen in southern seas muttered about strange sightings above the horizon. Allied officers returned from polar stations with reports they could not explain, some dismissed, some classified. In rural towns, stories linger of monks approached by foreign men decades earlier, offering them coin and demanding tales of hidden passages. Each fragment could be explained separately: coincidence, error, embellishment. Yet bundled together, they form a form of shadow history that will not vanish. Those who try to trace pure fact find themselves instead in a weave of testimony, rumour, and documented propaganda, all bound tightly. Sometimes what's missing tells the louder story. Silence in records, abrupt changes in expeditions, and consistent whispers across distant cultures. These supply the shape of the mystery. And so, the question lingers, not answered by history's clean pages, but kept alive in what refuses to rest quietly beneath them. The hall is quiet except for a single voice carrying across heavy wood beams. In 1818, John Cleves Sims Jr., a former army officer turned lecturer, declares to Congress that Earth is hollow and habitable within. His words do not come as metaphor or poetry, but as certainty. He insists there are vast gateways at the poles themselves, circular openings leading to inner continents where light glows and civilizations thrive, hidden from ordinary view. To many in the room, it sounds fanciful, almost absurd. Yet Sims speaks with conviction, holding out not just a theory but a promise. Fund an expedition, and he will lead it himself. What followed was a mixture of ridicule and fascination, the kind of claim too extraordinary to vanish entirely, especially when paired with maps sketching immense whirlpools and magnetic anomalies at the crown of the world. His passion was relentless. He printed pamphlets addressed to the whole world in bold letters, declaring Earth contained concentric shells, each with its own air and life. He compared his vision to Columbus sailing west, describing the polar gateways as discoveries that would rewrite not just geography but destiny. He even sketched what came to be called the Sims Holes, images of perfect circles at the top and bottom of the globe, entrances that seemed obvious once marked on a drawing. Though his campaign failed to win congressional funding, the idea seeped into public imagination. Ordinary people hearing the story in taverns or reading newspaper reprints could picture themselves standing at the edge of those holes, peering down into another world. Long before Sims, though, maps had already given strange hints of something unusual in the north. Renaissance cartographers drew the Arctic not as blank ice, but as a place of motion. Gerardus Mercator's famous map from the late 1500s filled the top of the world with swirling waters, channels converging at a black rock at the pole. 4 continents surrounded this whirlpool, separated by rivers rushing toward the centre. Centuries later, the Zeno brothers produced charts that seemed to show islands no modern explorer ever reached, suggesting phantom lands that flickered on the horizon but vanished when approached. Supporters suggest these maps were not mistakes, but inherited memory, fragmented knowledge of regions hidden by thick fogs and unstable skies. Critics counter they were products of guesswork, symbols transformed into geography through error. Still, once an image is drawn, it lingers. Early explorers, braving brutal seas, reported visions that seemed to confirm these strange maps. Sailors noted lights dancing across waters where no aurora should reach. They described lands half seen, mountains that gleamed and then melted back into horizon haze, compasses spun without guidance near magnetic disturbances. Skeptics today explain these events in straightforward terms. Mirages caused by atmospheric refraction can elevate or distort distant images, stacking them in glittering layers, cities of air suspended above the sea. Magnetic anomalies, tied to the shifting northern field, often sent early instruments spiralling. Yet believers claim these explanations reassure without erasing the deeper possibility that explorers brushed the edges of something enormous, seeing the threshold but never passing through. The fascination with polar illusions overlapped easily with Sims's campaign. Reports of phantom islands could be recast as glimpses of lands inside. A compass spinning wild could be argued as proof of great forces drawing the needle toward hidden depths. Each unexplained story became a small stone in the growing structure of myth, and people often prefer a mystery left unsolved to a neat explanation that strips away wonder. The more official voices dismissed Sim as calling him a fool, the more some listeners leaned in, curious about what authority wanted silenced. Decades later, the obsession crossed into aviation. Admiral Richard Byrd is remembered for his polar flights, but it is his alleged beyond-the-pole accounts that fuel enduring fantasies. In one diary claimed to be his, though proven to be a later forgery, he describes flying over fertile valleys and meeting advanced beings who warned of nuclear dangers. Even believers accept the text as fabricated. Still, they point to Byrd's genuine public statements about Antarctica as the land of everlasting mystery, and interpret them as coded truths rather than flowery language. Pilot testimonies from the same era mention strange horizons, sudden greening of skylight, and unreliable navigation. All stories that keep the polar openings alive in imagination even without direct evidence. In the modern digital era, curiosity shifted from parchment maps to satellite feeds. Many who study online archives point to blurred circles or blacked out areas near the poles on publicly available platforms. On Google Earth, the poles are often covered by stitched mosaics, leaving dark voids. NASA's highest resolution images frequently stop before the crown, with data gaps disguised by white smears. Engineers explain these images as simple artifacts of orbit patterns, problems caused by satellite paths that rarely pass perfectly over the axis. But among believers, such errors stand out less as mistakes and more as proof. If technology can map Mars in breathtaking detail, why, they ask, does the centre of our own planet remain pixelated and blurred? Flight restrictions add to speculation. Civilian airlines curve their routes far around polar extremes, avoiding direct paths that geometry would suggest as shorter. Military airspace around certain latitudes is tightly controlled, officially due to weather volatility, radio communication issues, and the remoteness that makes rescue operations nearly impossible. Believers interpret these restrictions as intentional concealment, a way to prevent wandering eyes from catching sight of immense gateways. To them, the modern era feels not more transparent but more guarded, as if improved technology has tightened the barriers rather than erased them. At the same time, science has advanced in directions Sims could never imagine. Seismology records the waves of earthquakes rolling across the globe, bending and scattering in predictable patterns. These waves reveal layers: crust, mantle, liquid outer core, solid inner core, mapped with high precision. Gravity measurements match these findings, confirming densities and boundaries that leave no space for hollow caverns of continental scale. Direct polar exploration, from nuclear submarines beneath Arctic ice to ice core drilling in Antarctica, offers no sign of immense openings. By the mid-20th century, Earth was described thoroughly enough to declare Sims's vision impossible. Critics dismiss the entire framework, not just as wrong but absurd, arguing that physics itself would collapse if Earth were hollow. Yet, the endurance of belief has never needed science for fuel. Each blurred photo, each compass that falters, each old map showing phantom islands is gathered like a shard of antique glass and placed into a mosaic of mystery. Some whisper the entrances shift or are protected by forces that cloud instruments deliberately. Supporters suggest governments saw reasons beyond public comprehension to deny access. Protecting people from knowledge they feared could destabilise society. Still others drift toward a more spiritual reading, that polar openings exist not in physical ice but in perceptions, accessible only under certain conditions, a veiled reality layered against our own. When woven together, the strands form a curious pattern. Centuries of cartographers, sailors, aviators, and modern data glitches create a tapestry that seems designed to invite speculation. The facts are often thin, the explanations clear enough. Yet because nothing erases the sum of echoes, interest grows stronger the more it is dismissed. Mysteries live less on evidence than on absence, on the gaps that persist between official record and private imagination. Human stories form the heartbeat within. Picture Sims struggling in a crowded hall, his hands gripping the podium as he explains his vision and hears only laughter. Or the sailor pressing frozen fingers against a compass he cannot trust, wondering if the horizon ahead hides land no one has charted. Or the pilot gripping his headset as static floods his radio and a green shimmer swims across his windshield. These individual moments, carried across time, sustain the weight of theories larger than themselves. Each one is a reminder that large myths often anchor in smaller human confusions, fragments of light caught against storms or ice. The persistence of the polar opening obsession reveals something deeper, a fascination with thresholds. Humans have always imagined gateways at edges, mountaintops, caves, waterfalls, deserts. The poles are the ultimate edges. So far removed from daily life, they seem a stage apart from reality. To stand on that stage, one imagines, could be to cross into a new order of existence. Whether real or metaphorical, the possibility itself has power, and in that way the hollow earth never closes, no matter how often scientists shut its door. Each generation renews this fascination in ways fitted to its tools. In the Renaissance, sketches of whirlpools provided proof. In Simms's century, pamphlets and speeches carried the spark. For Byrd's time, aircraft and auroras gave the mystery wings. Today, it is satellites, blurred pixels, and curious routing patterns in flight logs. Always the form changes, but the hunger remains. People want thresholds, and when those thresholds lie in frozen wastes sealed by ice and weather, they seem even more convincing as entrances. Perhaps in the end, this obsession reflects less about Earth and more about ourselves. The wish for hidden realms is not just about geography, but about possibility. When the surface feels mapped and ordinary, we turn our eyes to the only places left unmapped. The darkest oceans, the deepest caves, the poles themselves. In that blankness, we project civilizations, guardians, or wisdom awaiting rediscovery. Whether true or not, the allure endures, and so the world's remote regions hold a paradox. Science describes them in mechanical detail, yet their distance, their silence, and their danger still invite people to wonder. The poles remain borders between knowledge and imagination, thresholds onto which entire civilizations are drawn in thought. Even if no hole pierces the ice, the idea of it continues to hum quietly in the background of human fantasy. That hum guides the story forward, for where ice, politics, and myth join hands, new layers of hidden possibility arise. The obsession with polar openings does not simply fade with proof against it. It evolves, spreading into whispers of bases, treaties, and encounters beneath the frozen wastes. And in that evolution, the fascination with thresholds becomes more than legend, setting the stage for secrecy and speculation to intertwine in new forms that never quite let go. High in the Himalayas, wind threads through bronze bells strung at the edge of a monastery. Their tones drift into the thin air, mingling with the hush of snow carried across ridges. Monks here speak of Shambhala not as allegory, but as geography, hidden valleys and radiant halls woven within the world's mountains. The entrance, according to their law, is guarded, visible only when the seeker's heart reflects a certain stillness. In this tradition, the earth itself conceals a kingdom of wisdom, withdrawn yet waiting. You can almost picture a traveller pausing at a stony pass, his hand resting on rock, unaware that behind it an entire court in luminous chambers holds counsel, unseen yet close. Such stories carry across continents. In Indian cosmology, there is Patala, jewelled with Naga palaces where serpent beings guard subterranean wealth. Across Central Asia, whispers of Agartha describe a realm stretching beneath vast plains, a civilization not fallen but hidden. In Tibet, Shambhala takes on a radiant character, courts of kings, sages, and souls untouchable by ordinary geography. What ties them together is a single promise. Just beneath our feet dwell beings advanced beyond measure, watching as the surface world stumbles along its uncertain path. The contradiction waits in plain view. If such places exist, why has no one found their gates with certainty? Believers answer with an old logic. Entrances open only to those who are ready. A person approaching with arrogance or greed will see nothing but stone. A pilgrim hungry for wisdom and balance may find a door forming where no door stood before. Guardians wait in these stories, testing each visitor, measuring their intent like scales weighing the unseen. For those measured unworthy, the chambers stay sealed, hidden by illusions of cliff, mist, or labyrinthine passages that lead only in circles. Western mystics absorb these ideas in a time hungry for hidden maps. Helena Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society in the 19th century, presented Shambhala and Agartha not as myth, but as living sanctuaries. In her view, they were populated by ascended masters, beings who guided human progress from chambers veiled within mountains. They preserved ancient knowledge and steered history from behind the curtain. Ordinary governments ruled by force, the hidden kingdom ruled by wisdom. To her followers, the very struggles of society, wars, revolutions, moral upheavals, were met with quiet interventions from these vaulted corridors beneath the world. Others carried her vision further. The French occultist Saint-Yves d'Alvedre described Agartha as a sanctuary ruled by a king of the world, a figure blending spiritual and political power. This kingdom, by his account, was not a small enclave, but a vast civilization, governed by principles of justice and balance. It reached its influence through subterranean tunnels, connecting sacred sites across continents like veins beneath skin. Pyramids, temples, and shrines became marked not only above ground, but nodes in an underground lattice. Those tunnels, in his telling, allowed hollow chambers beneath deserts, mountains, and seas to form one collective body of the hidden. Here another strand in the story emerges: the survivors. Many traditions suggest that when surface civilizations faced catastrophe, their wisest fled underground. Some claim the survivors of Atlantis carved new cities in Earth's depths to keep their learning alive. Others speak of the Lemurians, an older people who turned downward as waters rose, carrying knowledge of stars and healing. In this frame, each disaster sent humanity's treasures deeper. Above ground, empires fell. Below, archives of wisdom grew. One can picture libraries flickering with crystalline glow, while above them turbulent oceans or collapsing cities erased the record of what came before. Descriptions of what lies inside these kingdoms rarely match primitive caves. They shimmer with technology that feels closer to tomorrow than yesterday. Some accounts describe walls lined with crystals operating as both light and memory, storing knowledge across centuries. Passageways link continents, a secret subway system not bound by borders. Energy flows through subtle frequencies tuned into sound and vibration, rather than combustion or steel. Healers use waves rather than blades, crystals instead of medicine. Flights across the globe use hidden tunnels instead of skies. It's not ruin that is imagined, but brilliance. Civilizations undimmed by the erosion of time. A darker element shadows the radiant image, though. In Hindu tales, Nagas emerge both as protectors and potential deceivers, offering wisdom with one hand and danger with the other. In some modern interpretations, non-human forces live in these depths, serpentine, reptilian, or entirely unearthly. They are said not to descend from the stars, but to choose Earth's interior as their fortress. Such additions turn the radiant halls into contested territory, part sanctuary, part staging ground. Supporters suggest this explains myths of dragons beneath mountains, beings who guard treasures or knowledge with jealous ferocity. Critics counter that these stories may mirror human fears projected onto the unknown darkness below. In the 20th century, as strange lights began to report in skies from New Mexico to Siberia, some speculated these craft were not visitors from other planets. Instead, they were residents of Earth returning briefly to the surface. A disk seen hovering near volcanoes or slipping into mountainsides became, in this lore, craft entering hidden gateways. The so-called hangars of Agartha were not fantasies, but the origin point of unexplained aerial phenomena. For those drawn to this vision, extraterrestrials become intraterrestrials, their home not in distant solar systems, but within the veins of the planet itself. Skeptics interpret the same stories as metaphors dressed in geography. Shambhala, they argue, is not a literal kingdom, but a stage of enlightenment. Agartha, with its ascended masters, reflects the human longing for guidance and structure beyond what politics provides. Patala's jewelled palaces echo desires for hidden richness of spirit, not treasure beneath soil. Read in this way, subterranean civilizations map the inward journey rather than hidden continents. Their guardians are moral tests, their tunnels are paths of consciousness, and their radiant courts are states of being reached through practice rather than excavation. Yet the accounts stay with us. Visitors from Shambhala in Tibetan stories bring messages urging humanity to turn from greed. In esoteric circles, messengers of Agartha appear not as saviours, but as reminders. Emissaries who step briefly into surface time carrying warnings or encouragement, then vanish again. They suggest endurance rather than revelation, reminding the listener that wisdom waits, but entry requires readiness. What is described is less a spectacular unveiling, and more a whispered assurance that survival carries meaning beyond what history records. The myth enlarges when woven into fiction. Writers in the 19th and early 20th centuries populated underground worlds with lush ecosystems, inner suns, and prehistoric beasts. Agartha and Shambhala inspired imaginations across pulp magazines and novels, presenting hidden continents as playgrounds of awe and fear. In cinema, these spaces became shaded caverns housing civilizations untouched by surface wars. To audiences, the separation between speculation and story blurred until one fed the other. In each retelling, the core promise remained that the Earth might cradle secrets far beyond the everyday horizon. During the rise of the New Age movement in the 20th century, Agartha became less a map and more a frequency. Workshops spoke of tuning into Agarthan vibrations through meditation or crystal resonance. Channelers claimed to receive teachings from subterranean masters, framing ancient lore as current practice. Sacred sites, stone circles, pyramids, mountain caves were suggested as portals, not physically opening but resonating with energy from the hidden world. To those who sought, Agartha was not unreachable. It was underfoot, humming in the quiet between ordinary steps. Only readiness, not armies, bridged the gap. What draws so many variations together is resilience. Cultures across vast distances insisted there is wisdom sealed within the earth, rather than scattered on its volatile surface. Whether remembered as Atlantean engineers, Naga kings, or luminous ascended beings, the figures are consistent in role. Guardians of treasure, stewards of balance, watchers of human folly. They do not parade upon the stage of history. They are backstage, waiting. The Earth becomes not a closed shell, but a layered vessel storing civilizations like memory keepsakes. Supporters suggest the persistence of these tales reflects memory encoded as myth, recollections of times when disasters forced ancestors underground. Critics counter with psychological reasoning. Hidden kingdoms mirror hidden potential, giving societies a way to dream of perfect order just below the chaos. Perhaps both explanations breathe together. Myths arise not from empty air, but from memory and hope, braided until no boundary holds between them. Whether a sanctuary of beings or mirror of spirit, the kingdoms represent an enduring conviction that somewhere the best of humanity survives intact. Picture the traveller again, standing before a cliff in the thin light of dawn. He brushes snow from his sleeve, unaware that behind stone could stretch passageways glowing in crystalline radiance. Or perhaps not. Perhaps those halls unfold only inward, landscapes within the mind urging humanity toward wisdom. The traveller remains on the outside, still searching, still climbing, and in that tension, between what might be physically hidden and what might remain symbolic, the myth of Shambhala and Agartha continues its quiet pulse. The story does not end, nor does it yield proof. It lingers as possibility, sustained by echoes across continents and centuries. Whether one takes it as literal geography or inward map, the meaning is similar. Somewhere, wisdom survived calamity, preserved not by armies but by design. And if one day the gates should open, they will not reveal treasure in the expected sense. They will reveal what has always been promised. Knowledge held in reserve, waiting for the hour when surface dwellers are ready to receive it. The wind moves through broken stones of forgotten temples, weaving into grooves left by hands now dust. In that faint breath, old voices seem to whisper the same improbable claim, repeated from continent to continent, that beneath our feet waits not silence but societies structured and alive, living in hidden darkness. The Greeks envisioned Hades not as emptiness but with gates, rivers and rulers. Mesopotamians spoke of a house where the dead ate clay and moved under strict hierarchy. The Maya mapped Xibalba with its trials, lords and cruel contests. None described hollow nothingness. Each one drew a world busy with rules, roles and inhabitants. The weight of so many echoes raises a quiet question. How could cultures who never touched hands see the underworld as crowded and purposeful, not barren void? Some supporters suggest these shared patterns reveal more than coincidence. They point to how Hopi tales describe the ant people who sheltered humanity in caverns when the surface was scorched. Across the seas, Norse skalds told of Svartalfheim, with dwarves crafting weapons in glowing forges far below. Hindu epics described Nagas in jewelled palaces beneath rivers, while Taoist sages whispered of immortals hidden in mountain grottos. The details do not match perfectly, yet the function overlaps. Civilizations inside the Earth, advanced, resilient, and sometimes more powerful than those on the surface. Geographically, it stretches faith. These people lived oceans apart, yet the designs align like mirrors placed across a sphere. Skeptics highlight imagination's shared roots, ways humans explain death, safety, and the unknown. But the consistency carries its own pull. What if the echoes are not symbolic metaphors but encoded recollections? For Europeans in the Middle Ages, whispers took sharper form. In Woolpit, two green-skinned children emerged from the edges of a pit after wandering upward. They spoke no known tongue, ate only beans, and claimed to have come from a twilight land beneath the earth, where the sun shone dim and perpetual. Scholars called the story a medieval fable, or the memory of malnourished orphans wounded by light. Yet its detail lingers. A pale realm, neither day nor night, just beneath the known ground. The children did not describe heaven or hell. They described geography, fields and settlements under dim sky. This story folds strangely alongside the ancient myths, as if the same map pressed through history and half-formed accounts repeated again and again. Catastrophe also weaves into the thread. Cultures separated by oceans tell parallel tales. Fire raining from the heavens, waters surging from below, and a small group saved by retreat into caverns. The Hopi say humanity was guided underground during burning cycles of the world. In Welsh myth, survivors of flood found passageways under hills where life continued. Quechua traditions in the Andes tell of ancestors hiding in caves until the skies cleared after great firestorms. Critics counter this as coincidence bred from shared fears of natural disaster. Yet the detail of seeking salvation underground, repeated by those who never met one another, creates more than a faint rhythm. It forms a recurring chorus, suggesting underground refuge became our oldest safety net. Not only metaphor, but perhaps memory. The underworld's population in these stories is not chaos, it is ordered. Hades was a hierarchy with rulers, judges of souls, and guides like Hermes. Xibalba had lords who orchestrated trials. Even the dwellers of Svartalfheim served distinct functions as craftspeople. Guardians defend gates, not just monsters. Some whisper that this repeating order hints at something remembered, not invented. The inhabitants test, teach, or resist intruders. They are never described as random wanderers of dark tunnels. They watch, they manage, they present structure that feels more like community than nightmare. That detail becomes harder to dismiss as simple metaphor. What drives cultures to describe communities underfoot, always with rulers, artisans, and guides who set terms? Archaeology opens another crease in this pattern. In Turkey's Cappadocia lies the underground city of Derinkuyu, spiralling down for scores of meters with ventilation shafts, stables, living chambers and altars, enough to house tens of thousands. In Malta's Hypogeum lay vast stone-lined chambers, carved with resonant acoustics, capable of sustaining extended populations out of the sun. Neither of these were fables, and they prove ancient humans could indeed carve entire hidden civilizations below ground. Builders were not imagining corridors underground, they lived them. Supporters suggest these are fragments of a greater tradition, evidence of survival strategies when catastrophe came. Skeptics point out they are still human handiwork, designed for war or worship, not remnants of grand hidden kingdoms. Yet the physical proof alters the way old myths are read. Beneath the soil, humans really were building lives unseen. Entrance traditions appear across the map as threshold tests. In Tibet, stories place guardians at mountain routes, monks warning travellers who seek the way to Shambhala. In the Amazon, certain caves are watched with care, locals telling of forest protectors who punish the unworthy. In India, snake guardians bar passage to subterranean courts, and in Celtic lands, fairy mounds offer entrances only to those who follow complex rules of time and silence. The motif repeats. To approach the underworld is not simply to stumble into a cave, but to pass a test. Some suggest these tales encode real-life protective measures against intruding armies or strangers, teaching outsiders fear of places meant to remain undisturbed. Others whisper the rituals were indeed designed, filters to keep the careless from uncovering something deeper. Either way, the ritualized gate stands out. The earth opens only for those permitted or prepared. Think of the people who first pressed hands to stone inside Cappadocia's darkened tunnels, carrying fire to find their footing, a mother keeping children quiet as armies rode above, a worker leading animals down to feed in safety. Their actions echo the same myths. Survival beneath. Across time, enterprising miners in Central Asia reported hearing echoes of voices below the shafts. Farmers in medieval Europe warned of beings who walked from hills at night. These accounts bridge practical living with whispered lore. Small lives, small details, folded into the grand shadow of imagined or remembered underground societies. Perhaps these voices are metaphor. Perhaps they are fragments of common psychology, our way of placing fear and wonder in the world beneath our feet. Yet the regularity across maps, centuries and tongues restricts easy dismissal. Archaeological sites prove humans turned Earth into shelter. Folk tales repeat organised societies underground. Stranger events like the Children of Woolpit blur lines of fable and lived memory. The pattern sharpens the longer you stare at it. Myths might reflect more than imagination. They might conceal historical events reframed as tales of gods, spirits, or twilight lands. The record leaves one realization, unsettling in its symmetry. These myths did not rise in isolation. They reflect a global template. Civilizations said the same thing again and again. There are people beneath us, with homes, rules, and tests. Either this is a colossal coincidence born of parallel invention, or it is the faded retelling of human contact with something tangible below the surface. It need not be hollow space in the way Sims or Halley dreamed of. It may be something stranger, something reinterpreted again and again, until memory blurred into myth. The earth beneath our steps holds more than stone and soil. It may hold remnants of stories lived and half forgotten. And so these ancient voices, temples echoing with wind, caves worn smooth by hands, tales passed across the fire, still guide imagination into hollow earth. Their rhythm gave fuel for every later explorer, mystic or dreamer who traced maps across polar wastes or listened for doors in mountain walls. The foundation was not science alone, but memory layered into myth, a murmur that refuses to fade. Tonight those murmurs still travel, carried across centuries like faint voices in stone corridors, insisting that the surface world was never the whole story. Smoke curls from a stick of incense in a dim Victorian parlour. Books line the walls, their spines worn from constant touch. At the centre of the table sits Helena Blavatsky, surrounded by translated Sanskrit texts and Tibetan scrolls. She claimed words drifted to her not from the imagination, but from hidden beings inside the Earth's recesses. She spoke of chambers carved into mountains, sealed from surface eyes, yet alive with voices guiding humanity's path. To her students, these were not stories. They were instructions, part of a grand architecture woven into the planet itself. In her vision, Shambhala was not only a parable of enlightenment, but a sanctuary with halls of knowledge guarded until humanity matured enough to handle them. She folded together Eastern cosmologies with Western occult hunger, turning the idea of subterranean kingdoms into something larger than rumour. For her, Agartha became both a location and a lesson. Somewhere below, ascended masters moved unseen, moderating humanity's chaotic progression with patience, and at times stern correction. The fact that Blavatsky herself framed her teachings as having been received directly from these masters gave weight to her claim. She made the invisible feel tangible. That claim transformed Hollow Earth speculation. Where earlier figures like Simi spoke of impossible geometry or polar voids, Blavatsky built an interior universe of spirit and hierarchy. Supporters suggest she effectively remapped the underworld, upgrading old myths of Hades or Xibalba into sanctuaries of wisdom rather than tombs. Maps were redrawn, not on paper, but in the imagination, and seekers began tracing connections across continents, searching for tunnels beneath pyramids, catacombs, and mountain ranges. For them, the Earth's crust became something similar to the skin of the body, resting above vast hidden channels pulsing with ancient memory. The French thinker Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alver added fuel. In 1886, he published a work describing Agartha as global in reach, ruled by a mysterious figure he called the King of the World. He presented the realm as orderly, just, and far older than our surface civilizations. According to him, tunnels stretched between sacred sites, Egyptian pyramids, Andean temples, even Angkor in Cambodia. He made it appear as though secret conduits lay beneath the foundations of human culture, tying them together in a system hidden yet universal. For spiritual seekers in the 19th century, this was more than comforting. It was staggering. The Theosophical Society, which Blavatsky co-founded, absorbed these descriptions into its own cosmology. Members such as Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater painted Agartha not as fantasy, but as evidence of a hidden hierarchy guiding the world's evolution. The emphasis was never simply on knowledge preserved in stone. These teachings promised active oversight, suggesting a living order beneath the seeming chaos of human history. Some whisper that world-changing breakthroughs in science and philosophy during that era were influenced by this belief in subterranean guardians. Critics counter, there is no proof, only parallel timing. Yet the myth took hold. Atlantean survivors were placed in these subterranean networks, their wisdom preserved after destruction at sea. Lemurian refugees were also imagined to have retreated below ground rather than vanish entirely. Each cataclysm on the surface turned into a migration, with advanced cultures finding sanctuary below. The Earth became a storehouse of not only stone but civilizations, the sedimentary layers concealing memory deeper than any fossil. Around a candlelit table in London, these ideas spread far and wide. For a generation, seekers began treating underground kingdoms as both spiritual guidance and lost libraries of human progress. This was not without danger. When knowledge is framed as hidden treasure, others imagine it as a resource to extract, control, and weaponize. By the early 20th century, what started as a mystical geography shifted into political ambition. The Thule Society in Germany drew heavily on theosophical writings. They shaped hollow world maps into proof of hidden Aryan ancestors, advanced beings whose power could be claimed through ritual and will. The Vril Society, another similar group, twisted the narrative into speculation about an energy source. vril channeled from subterranean domains into usable power. To them, the supposed masters beneath the earth did not exist to guide humankind. They existed to choose sides. The Nazis carried these ideas into state projects. They envisioned themselves not merely as political leaders, but as inheritors of a grand subterranean destiny. Expeditions marched to Tibet under the Ahnenerbe, the SS's research arm. Archaeologists measured skulls, listened to chants and documented lineages, convinced they were retracing bloodlines to beings alleged to dwell beneath Himalayan mountains. Some whisper these missions concealed far stranger motives, seeking entrances to hidden realms themselves. Others dismiss such claims as interpretations placed after the fact. Still, the expeditions happened, and records survive of German teams cataloguing not only human variation, but ancient myths connecting sacred mountains to unseen chambers within the earth. These occult expeditions provide a turning point. The Hollow Earth myth, once about enlightenment, now bent toward political power. Knowledge became ammunition. Theosophy's visions of ascended masters were filtered through racial ideology. Instead of a sanctuary where wisdom was kept safe, the imagined underground became an arsenal of untapped power. Within this shift rests a quiet tragedy. The same myth that promised unity was harnessed into narratives of division. Supporters suggest this is why the Hollow Earth endured so vividly through the 20th century. Once it became both hope and weapon, it could not easily fade. Nazi fascination with occult geography evolved alongside war. Rumours spread that underground bases were carved out beneath Antarctic ice during the late 1930s, linking to stories of Neuschwabenland and beyond. Believers point to advanced aircraft allegedly spotted by Allied forces toward the end of the conflict, suggesting they were drawn from technology preserved below. Critics counter that wartime desperation fueled exaggerations, with propaganda mistaken for proof. Yet the association between Nazi ideology and lost subterranean power has never fully disappeared, and it remains a central part of Hollow Earth lore today. What makes these stories more unsettling is how they quietly influenced later conspiracy. Some argue post-war intelligence agencies continued the work, absorbing Theosophical Society's symbols and Nazi occult obsessions into classified studies. Tales of underground facilities, from Dulce Base in New Mexico to alleged polar installations, borrow directly from this framework. In these accounts, underground kingdoms no longer stand as holy sanctuaries. They are secret laboratories, hidden from the public and staffed by shadow alliances. The myth's transformation was complete, from temple to fortress, from scroll to device, from wisdom held in trust to power kept on a leash. The tapestry of these beliefs still reveals certain patterns. At the heart of Theosophy lay an urge for hidden guidance, a comfort that someone wiser was watching over humanity. But once filtered through ambition, whether geopolitical or ideological, those same myths became rationalizations for secrecy and control. They were not only stories, they were blueprints. Each tunnel imagined beneath the earth became a symbol for hidden corridors of influence in the real world. Societies within societies, hidden masters steering outcomes unseen. For believers, the surface world is often only a stage. The real play is hidden underfoot. Blavatsky's role in shaping this vision cannot be overstated. In her 1888 work, The Secret Doctrine, she declared she'd received knowledge from these masters directly, positioning them not as echoes of the past, but as living presences. This claim gave her teachings a weight that raw myth could not carry. Members of her society could point to her words as testimony, and even among skeptics who doubted her abilities, the allure remained. What if wisdom truly did survive beneath cold stone, waiting for the right century to rise? That possibility still sparks curiosity as much as it fuels suspicion. Santiva's contribution also shaped later expectations with his talk of tunnels linking sacred sites across the world. These were not just passages of stone, he claimed, but channels of spiritual force transmitting knowledge and influence. No archaeologist ever confirmed such tunnels. No survey uncovered hidden foundations beneath world monuments, binding them together in a subterranean net. But the imagery alone was powerful. Still today, one can find maps circulating that attempt to trace global alignments, placing connecting points where deserts, jungles, and oceans separate civilizations. For believers, absence of evidence becomes proof of concealment. For skeptics, it is the hallmark of myth. This intersection between hope and misuse explains why the Hollow Earth occupies such a peculiar cultural position. It is at once mystical, spiritual, conspiratorial, and political. Every retelling reflects the values of its age. In the 19th century, it was solace for seekers. In the early 20th, it became justification for power. And in the later Cold War era, it became imagery for secrecy and global cover-ups. The myth's shape changes the way light changes colours through glass. It retains the same edges, but its shades depend on the angle of interpretation. Today, conspiracy tales that trace underground networks of politics or technology echo directly from these occult foundations. The idea of knowledge hidden underground is no longer only geographical, it represents influence unseen. When whispers speak of secret networks linking governments or corporations, they often resurrect the same structure that Saint-Yves once mapped as tunnels beneath temples. Only now the architecture is metaphorical, mapping secrecy rather than stone. The unsettling part is that every phase of the Hollow Earth story mirrors human ambition more than physical geology. When people dream of wisdom preserved below, they project longing for guidance. When groups transform the myth into weapons, they expose their hunger for power. The underground kingdom becomes an empty stage onto which humanity casts its fears and desires. That is why the image persists. It reflects not what is hidden below, but what rests within the imagination. It is tempting to dismiss Blavatsky and her followers as members of a bygone occult fad, their incense and scrolls eclipsed by the hard science of geology and seismology. Yet their narratives survive in subtle ways. Science cannot erase the attraction of imaginative maps. Every blurred satellite image, every unexplored cavern system reignites the question posed by theosophy. What if an order greater than us still hides beneath our steps? Even if the geological door seems firmly closed, the symbolic one never shuts, and symbolism, as history shows, can be just as influential as fact. The sequence is striking. Myths of the underworld drift into Victorian parlours. They are reframed by seekers as sanctuaries of wisdom. Then those sanctuaries are altered by political movements into tools for power. From there, wartime rumour and secrecy reinforce old patterns of suspicion. Finally, the echo enters modern conspiracy ready-made, refitted for the anxieties of surveillance and hidden governance. A tale rooted in dust and stone now forms the skeleton of how many picture the unseen workings of our modern world. So the question lingers, soft and persistent. Were these kingdoms of wisdom below the earth ever real? Or were they projections, mirrors of what generations wanted most? Comfort, guidance, control. Some whisper the search never ended, that fragments of theosophical societies influenced covert agencies, that the quest for hidden masters slipped underground into classified programs. Others dismiss this, insisting the connections are overdrawn and rooted in coincidence. Yet the mere possibility encourages listeners to pause, headphones in the late night, and wonder if ancient lore of chambers beneath mountains may still hold significance. Either way, the transformation is clear. Blavatsky dreamed of enlightenment in caverns of stone, of teachers waiting patiently to raise humankind forward. By the time these myths crossed into the hands of occult politicians, the dream had hardened. Ascended masters became imagined allies of exclusion, their wisdom reshaped as engines of domination. The Hollow Earth turned from a sanctuary of guidance into an arsenal of power. And as secrecy infused modern statecraft, that arsenal transformed again into metaphors for control, hidden governance, and unseen manipulation. The search for buried wisdom, then, reflects more about those who seek than about what lies below. Blavatsky touched incense to flame, hoping to channel voices of guidance. The Thule Society twisted those whispers into plans for conquest, and modern conspirators hold them up as evidence of cover-ups and hidden governance. What lies beneath shifts depending on who is asking. That transformation tells us something unsettling. Perhaps the deepest hollows are not in the earth at all, but in the ambitions humans project into its depths. And yet, the silence after these stories is louder than the tales themselves. If true wisdom lies below, it waits in stillness. If power hides beneath, it stands veiled. In either case, the underground becomes a mirror of us, hinting at the ways human longing shapes shadows into maps. The next stage of the story, as history proves, will not end in those scroll-filled parlours. It will move into the modern canyon of expeditions, testimonies, and encounters where seekers still claim to glimpse the echoes of subterranean masters. The hiss of static carried across the polar airwaves in 1956, a faint and uneven signal cutting through layers of interference. On one channel, Admiral Byrd's voice emerged, strained and low, describing landscapes no map had marked. He spoke of valleys in bloom where only ice should exist, and of aircraft that seemed unbound by the technology of his era. That transmission, according to accounts retold later, faded into silence and was never heard again in the public record. For believers, what vanishes often carries more weight than what remains. The absence begins to echo louder than a statement ever could. Throughout the 20th century, Hollow Earth stories changed shape. They no longer belonged only to distant myths or the pages of speculative adventure novels. They began attaching themselves to pilots, explorers, miners, people who stood in positions close to the supposed thresholds. In reports, instruments failed. Compass needles turned in slow circles as though gripped by hidden currents. On flights along Arctic routes, some crew claimed the horizon shimmered and bent in ways no weather pattern could explain. For them, the Earth appeared alive in its unpredictability, hinting not at emptiness but at concealed layers pressing close beneath the visible. It was during this period that Byrd himself became a figure of legend beyond his own military record. Long after the end of Operation Highjump, a lost diary surfaced, allegedly belonging to him, though historians call it a fabrication. Within its pages, he described passing over the pole in 1947 into a hidden land of warmth, where mastodon-like animals moved along green fields and radiant beings welcomed him with warnings. Their message, at least as written in the diary, was blunt. Humanity was steering towards self-destruction with nuclear technology. Believers grasped onto the imagery, not caring much that the source had little support. The idea of a decorated explorer carrying warnings from inside the world suited an imagined history already in motion. Accounts pushed beyond paper. In South America, stories emerged of explorers who found caverns carved deep into mountain ranges, markings on the stone suggesting language or codes older than any local culture claimed to possess. In Siberia's mining regions, work crews drilled into shafts and came away shaken, reporting eerie sounds that resembled voices or machines operating far beneath. Some said the noise pressed upward like distant thunder drawn through earth rather than sky. In Central Asia, labourers described glimmers that stubbornly flickered in lower tunnels, even after headlamps failed. They swore the source felt alive, not like reflection, but intentional light guiding them back. Critics counter that isolation and extreme conditions distort the senses. Magnetic anomalies exist, especially near polar regions, where iron-rich rock can confuse compasses and strain instruments. Long hours in silence, far from sunlight, can twist perception. Isolation produces hallucinations, sometimes vivid, sometimes brief flickers of geometrical lights, or murmured voices that vanish the moment concentration returns. Natural causes, auroral reflections bouncing between atmospheric layers, ground reverberations from seismic activity, offer rational explanations for the very phenomena woven into Hollow Earth lore. Still, simple explanations rarely erase mysteries when witnesses swear with conviction. That power of conviction expands as belief folds into other domains of rumour. By the latter half of the century, the UFO narrative began to overlap with Hollow Earth. Lights seen near remote volcanoes, disks streaking across valleys in South America, glowing objects hovering near mountains, all became reinterpreted not as visitors from distant stars, but as neighbours surfacing from subterranean bases. The link tightened under the infamous Dull Space legend in New Mexico, which described hidden facilities carved under mesas where human and alien groups allegedly operated side by side. For those convinced, Earth's interior no longer held only mythical kings or guardians. It now hosted entire communities of advanced beings with technology rooted far beyond our own. The emotional pull of testimony cannot be ignored. A fact on paper may be dissected, questioned, or disproved. A first-person account spoken by someone who looks you straight in the eye carries a weight harder to dismiss. Across South American caverns, frozen Arctic roots, tundra mines, or desert mesas, the stories always retain the urgency of lived experience. They may contradict each other, they may lack evidence, yet the human voice shapes them into something that feels undeniable. For many listeners, this is what stands tall against institutional silence, the courage of a witness offering presence over absence. Here lies the paradox that conspiracy thrives upon. When official channels dismiss an event or deny any anomaly ever occurred, that denial itself becomes interpreted as proof of a greater cover. In this framework, every correction strengthens belief. A blurred satellite strip becomes deliberate censorship rather than technical error. A flight diverted from a frozen route becomes precaution against exposure rather than a simple matter of weather or safety. Once the frame is tilted this way, reassurance transforms into confirmation. The explanation folds inward, leaving no way out for those determined to hold the secret tight. Eyewitness encounters, whether in diaries or interviews, transform Hollow Earth speculation into a living mythology rather than a relic. Legends of the Nagas or Ant People align with reports of glowing tunnels in Venezuela or sudden auroral floods across the ice. Strangers' words carry the thread forward, bridging mythic antiquity with modern machinery. The pattern doesn't fade because the alleged experiences keep arriving. They never saturate enough to demand scientific recognition, yet they never disappear either. Each whispered recollection, however unverified, ensures that the Hollow Earth remains visible in imagination, mapped along fault lines where science and story touch. Consider what this says less about geology and more about perception. A sculpted myth from antiquity, retold through centuries, might seem distant until a miner recalls strange hums underfoot, or a pilot insists his compass no longer obeyed. Those small, lived details chain the past to the present more effectively than arguments over seismic charts. Whether fabricated or misperceived, they breathe warm air into cold archives, shifting Hollow Earth from speculation into something faintly breathing alongside us. That is why even skeptics acknowledge the weight, not of the claims themselves, but of their endurance. Supporters say the persistence proves an intentional pattern across cultures and ages. Critics argue humans simply lean toward filling gaps of silence with elaborate cosmology. Both positions recognise the same truth. Testimony carries heat into a cold equation. Perhaps the diary of Admiral Byrd was invented. Perhaps caverns echo with ordinary collapsing rock. Yet after long hours of silence in a shaft, or endless white stretched to the horizon, a sudden strange detail changes everything. It reminds us we are surrounded by more than we understand, and invites the mind to shape the void with story. The Hollow Earth endures in this tension, that the most compelling pieces remain unprovable, yet impossible to extinguish. A voice carried through static in 1956 speaking words that official channels chose not to preserve. A glowing cavern wall in South America remembered by one explorer and forgotten by all else. A hum in the ear of a Siberian worker who knows he heard something true, though machines explained otherwise. Each detail becomes one more ember stirred, bright enough to sustain belief in darkness, and so the myth stretches forward. Ancient underworlds of Sumer and Greece, Buddhist kingdoms radiant in Himalayan chambers, Nazi expeditions raising flags into deepening snow. Byrd's contested diary pages adorned with beings of light. The line runs unbroken through testimonies in every era. The thread moves from stone carving to compass failure to blurred pixel. Not proof, but persistence. Not data, but memory coded in human voices. Critics may dismantle evidence. Supporters may expand stories into elaborate frameworks. Yet both are reacting to accounts pressed forward by people who believed they saw, heard, or touched something unusual. That continuity gives Hollow Earth its resilience. It doesn't require agreement, only a willingness for accounts to be shared. As one claim fades, another surfaces. Believers lean on the rhythm itself. Where there is smoke, there is hidden fire. Or in this case, hidden light deep beneath stone. Whether justified or not, imagination thrives when nourished by the testimony of others. You can deny a myth, but you cannot quite silence someone's earnest story of what they believe they saw. The record, in the end, falls quiet more often than it explains. Static erases, diaries fade into questionable publications, voices echo only in retelling. Still, that quiet is never full. It flickers with echoes of aircraft gliding into impossible skies, or miners returning home with unease heavy in their throats. In that collection of fragments, the Hollow Earth continues to exist, not beneath crust and mantle, but in the testimonies of those claiming they brushed its edge. It is here, in rumour and recollection, where the true geography of Hollow Earth now lies. Not in geology texts or expedition reports, but in passing voices, half witness, half dreamer, offering up fragments of valleys beneath ice, or lights in the deepest tunnels. And whether those voices describe fact or fantasy, they create a reality of their own. A world beneath does not have to exist in stone for it to endure in memory. It is sustained each time a listener leans in close and wonders if the earth itself once opened its gates, if only for a chosen few. Water drips in the dark, a steady rhythm swallowed by stone. The light of a headlamp glances over slick limestone, revealing only inches at a time. In 2009, explorers in Vietnam halted in such silence, their beams caught by emptiness that seemed to dissolve the cave wall into infinity. They had stepped into Son Jong, a cavern so massive that skyscrapers from distant cities could have stood upright inside without scraping the ceiling. The air shifted in that void, cool but threaded with faint currents rising from underground rivers, a weather system of its own. Jungle plants grew where collapsed stone let in shafts of light, a green lung breathing in the dark. A place so vast, so alive, it was less a cave than an entire hidden world. The immensity of Son Jong startled even scientists used to surprising landscapes. These explorers reported chambers stretching longer than towns, ceilings as tall as towers, and rivers cutting through blackness that hadn't felt sunlight for millennia. In one chamber, mists condensed into clouds, storming quietly against rock that had never known surface winds. A cave shouldn't have an atmosphere, yet here it was, alive with weather. Each corner they walked seemed to undo assumptions about what belonged above and what below. For believers in unseen civilizations, it looked like proof that Earth still carried hidden architectures no map had captured. To geologists, it was a reminder that only a fraction of underground spaces had ever been charted. For those listening now, it whispers of chambers still locked away under our feet, waiting. Shift then to Mexico, where another underground marvel waits with very different conditions. In the Naka Crystal Cave, the air is so hot and humid that humans cannot survive unprotected for more than minutes at a time. Cooling suits and oxygen tanks are mandatory, and even then explorers left quickly, their bodies coated with condensed moisture, their eyes fogged by the oppressive steam. And yet what forced them down was worth the risk. Crystals taller than houses, some 30 feet in length, glowing pale as frozen light when lamps touched them. These colossal selenite structures filled the chamber like pillars in some otherworldly cathedral. It was no simple collection of stones. To those who stepped inside, it looked less like the work of geology and more like design, as though Earth itself had kept a record of alien architecture under its own crust. Critics insist natural mineral growth explains them, yet the sight defies expectation. The human eye searches for intention there, an order where none should exist. Sonjuong and Nika form two extreme poles of what underground wonders might be, one teeming with flows of life, the other in conditions hostile enough to strip breath in minutes. Together they unsettle the notion of predictable geology. For every mapped cave, there may be dozens waiting unrecognised, riddling the crust with spaces large enough to support forests or structures the size of palaces. While surface landscapes change visibly over time, the underground world records other processes. Mineral growth at a snail's pace, trapped water pressing into lattice bonds, magma hollowing new chambers that one day, or one accident, might open up to air. Some whisper that these known sites serve as glimpses into the far stranger mechanisms hidden deeper still. Consider the ringwoodite discovery too, a mineral locked far below the crust. Analysis has revealed that trapped within its crystalline shells are reserves of water larger than all the oceans on the surface combined, 3 times as much concealed within depths the deepest drill has never reached. There is no finding as haunting as this, an entire hidden ocean, not rushing free, but compressed inside molecular cages. If that water ever broke release, if fractures allowed it to rise, our Earth might change form. Scholars limit their descriptions to geologic processes, pointing out that it proves mantle convection and mineral saturation. Yet believers widen the thought. If water can hide for eons beneath us, could other vast ecosystems stay locked away with equal secrecy? To stand on land above trillions of tons of undiscovered water is to feel the ground shift slightly beneath your certainty. Cores of seismograph printouts add another layer. Since the mid-20th century, scientists have observed anomalies deep in the mantle, zones where earthquake waves slow or scatter, leaving seismologists puzzling over their density and structure. They call them blobs, immense patches that do not behave like the rest of the deep earth. On graphs, they create void-like shadows, places where expected echoes vanish. Mainstream theory ties them to ancient subducted plates or chemical differences preserved from Earth's formation. Still, supporters of Hollow Earth lean in, pointing to the unexplained scatter as possible evidence of something cavernous or hollow. These seismograph shadow zones, they argue, look as much like chambers as chemical anomalies. Critics counter such conclusions, noting that the scale, hundreds of miles across, would make human-like habitation impossible. Yet the intrigue endures, because the recordings prove one thing. Deep Earth remains partially unknown, still carrying riddles unbroken by science, easy fuel for speculation. Thread outward now to structures closer to the surface but still astonishing in scope. Lava tubes. In Hawaii, entire networks sprawl for miles beneath cooled crust, carved by past volcanic flows. Some tunnels are stable enough to walk through, wider than traffic tunnels, offering passageways nature formed without human planning. Iceland too bears caverns poured by ancient floods, long channels of stone curving beyond torchlight. In these tubes, temperatures steady, a subterranean stability that ancient settlers may have used for shelter. For conspiracy believers, such tubes resemble natural highways, ready-made corridors to deeper levels, a hidden subway system of the planet itself. The human imagination fills them with traffic, not of magma, but of civilizations long vanished or choosing secrecy. Whether too fanciful or not, the tunnels prove that the underground world easily mimics architecture hinted at in old myths. Straight halls, branching chambers, domes taller than cathedrals. Sinkholes add sudden shock to this larger network. A single collapse in China can unveil a void so vast sunlight filters down into unseen forests below. In Guatemala, an entire street opened overnight into a perfect cylinder of sheer walls, dropping into obscurity. These moments remind us that beneath the ground we take for granted, caverns can yawn open without warning. The ease with which the surface fails betrays how little we truly map the crust beneath. Some collapses reveal new ecologies, plants stretching in conditions no biologist expected. Others reveal nothing but falling stone and bottomless dark. Together they underscore the same message. Our surface is only the skin of something larger with its own unpredictable hollow organs. What startles many when confronted with this evidence is how little of Earth's subsurface has been charted. 1% is the rough estimate, far less by some measures. The rest, nearly all of it, remains closed to us, unmapped and possibly unmappable. Each year new cave systems are added, entire networks stretching for miles that had simply escaped human notice until accident or curiosity found them. For explorers, it means endless ground-breaking work. For theorists, it invites possibilities. If after centuries of science we still uncover forests hidden underground in Vietnam, or crystals big enough to dwarf cathedrals in Mexico, why assume what we know now captures the full truth? The unknown hangs heavy down there, pressing with as much force as the rock itself. Believers in Hollow Earth point to each new geological revelation as supporting their case. They assemble a quilt of discoveries: underground jungles, labyrinths of lava tubes, giant shadow zones revealed by seismographs, oceans powered within crystalline minerals, and sea coherence. To them it is not scattered marvels, but evidence of a broader interior architecture. Supporters suggest that official science underestimates, even conceals, the complexity that keeps appearing. Skeptics observe instead a predictable process. Extreme environments produce extreme formations, fascinating but still understood by geology. Yet, the debate lingers, because every new surprise feels like a shifting doorway. Each oddity both expands science and leaves gaps wide enough for speculation to slip through. Life itself compounds the puzzle. In complete darkness, organisms have adapted to eat stone, to breathe chemicals, even to flash faint light in caves untouched by man. In one Mexican chamber, fish swim blind, their bodies pale as unfinished clay, yet thriving in silence. Bacteria cling to crystal surfaces, feeding on minerals with patience measured in centuries rather than minutes. Such adaptations prove that life can thrive in places once deemed impossible. For storytellers and mystics, it is another hint that humanity limits its imagination, while the planet continues to present life that blossoms in forgotten corners. If bacteria can bloom on selenite crystal in heat that melts human lungs, what larger secrets could inhabit spaces humanity has yet to touch? And so the balance stands. Strange geological discoveries cannot be taken as proof of hollow worlds, yet they keep carving the ground for those stories to survive. Earth has shown us forests under stone ceilings, reserves of water eclipsing surface oceans, and crystals fashioned like temples in the dark. Those sights alone prove that the underground is stranger than the surface will ever feel in daylight. Science stretches to name and measure them, while myth latches on and fills the gaps left unexplained. For the listener tonight, that creates tension. Geology soberly closes doors while curiosity pushes them open again. What these wonders reveal most of all is that the crust of our world, thin as it is, shields tangled rooms, oceans and structures still ungrasped in scope. The confirmed finds already rival fantasy, and each year adds new ones to the list. It leaves us in a peculiar position, knowing more than our ancestors yet still peering from the same threshold, of wondering what hollow marvels truly lie in shadows no lamp has yet touched. The caves breathe, the crystals rise, the mantle carries water unseen, and deeper still, earthquakes ripple around anomalies no model fully explains. Perhaps Earth is not hollow in the way old theories insisted, but it remains full of interruptions, gaps and wonders that carve out living space for strangeness. Enough at least to fuel the endurance of stories that point downward. And so we arrive close to another layer. Beyond the raw geology lies the human story of restriction. Places withheld, flights redirected, images blurred. Secrets not of caves, but of men. Conspiracies, some call them. Cover-ups that keep the icebound continents and their mysteries hidden from common sight. From mineral shadows we move now into human shadows, where silence itself is a kind of map. Cold static pulses through the air in the winter of 1959. You hear the clipped urgency of radio chatter bouncing across miles of polar sky. Diplomats in distant capitals scrambling to bind themselves to an agreement that feels unlike anything the Cold War had yet allowed. 12 nations, bitter rivals among them, suddenly sign a single treaty. Antarctica will be set aside for peace. No weapons, no military, no tests or fortresses. The ink dries quickly, far from the ice, and the record presents it as progress, as foresight. Yet suspicion gathers at the edges of this quiet harmony, for unity forged among rivals often hides a deeper tension. The Antarctic Treaty is usually explained as practical. The frozen continent held little that seemed worth fighting for in the 1950s, at least on paper. There were no cities to seize, no farmland to demand. What Antarctica did have was vast territory perfect for satellites, missile arcs, or listening posts. Both Washington and Moscow were aware of its potential. The official story is that demilitarization was the only way to prevent escalation, making Antarctica a rare zone of peace while the rest of the world bristled with nuclear arsenals. But supporters of hidden theories suggest otherwise, that only something extraordinary could convince such powers to cooperate so fully. The timing haunts anyone willing to notice. Just over a decade earlier, Operation Highjump ended months ahead of schedule, its fleets returning in silence after storms, equipment failures, and accidents, also the reports claimed. Rumours of Nazi hideouts under the ice had circulated since the late 1930s. To many conspiracy watchers, the overlap is too clean. An abrupt military withdrawal in 1947, followed by a sudden global pact in 1959 to lock the same territory under peaceful law. Critics argue the connection is imagined, a paranoia woven from coincidence. But for others, the discordant rhythm is the very heart of the story, the moment when silence itself starts to sound like cover. Restrictions today feed the unease. Flight plans curve away from certain latitudes, as if passengers on ordinary routes must avoid lines drawn by unseen hands. Pilots describe how their maps bend them into arcs around miles of sky labelled off-limits by safety rules. Satellites add more fuel to the belief in obscurity. Wide swaths of digital photography blur into grey at the poles, data stripped into empty bands. Technical experts explain distortion at extreme latitudes, problems with sun angles, and the sheer difficulty of imaging terrain so white it confuses sensors. Yet conspiracy-minded viewers take the blurs as fingerprints of censorship, clear signs that something beneath those pixels was never meant to be seen. Research stations create another rhythm to the suspicion. Rows of buildings sometimes lie in odd, geometric patterns, neat in a way that reminds outsiders less of science than of military habit. To those who serve in them, these designs are merely the efficient way to stand against the wind, to lay cables, to survive storms. But for listeners convinced of secrets, the stations look like posts of a scattered fortress guarding something unseen. Supporters imagine surveillance equipment hidden in snowbanks, testing rooms buried beneath ice, hangars for crafts never recorded on flight logs. Critics answer that the only craft to supply planes, the only hangars full of spare gear and drums of fuel. The debate, unresolved, grows colder each year. During the Cold War, real covert programs unfolded in other polar lands. The United States carved Camp Century under Greenland's ice, a city of tunnels lit by nuclear generators. Officially, it was an experiment, but secrecy always bled into these projects. The DEW line stretched across Alaska and northern Canada, remote stations capturing Soviet signals and tracking missiles. None of these efforts involved Antarctica directly, but their existence sets precedent. Once people learn of a hidden city dug into ice, it's an easy leap to imagine another far south, still sealed and humming in the white. Government silence feeds this leap. It is exactly the kind of project history has shown can exist in shadows until later decades. NASA imagery creates its own gallery of puzzles. In online atlases, polar edges appear pixelated, sometimes sliced into strips as though someone ran scissors across the frame. Meteorologists argue that satellite coverage functions poorly near the poles, where orbits intersect and light becomes erratic. Data mismatches force patchwork images, leaving gaps. But those persuaded of concealment point instead to patterns in clouds that jar the eye. Lines too straight, curves too perfect. Supporters suggest they reveal digital editing used to hide entrances or structures, tampering disguised as technical mishap. Critics counter that humans are attuned to find shape in randomness, the same impulse that sees saints in toast or faces in stones. The conversation never finds steady ground. Stories add another shiver, expeditions cut short, budgets withdrawn with no explanation. A geologist raising quiet questions finds himself reassigned. A team steps into a cavern of blue ice, only to be recalled hours later by a message none could decipher. In official reports, these are mundane: supply shortages, unsafe weather, exhausted funding. Yet within the framework of suspicion, they transform. Silence carries more weight than speeches. Why cancel a project halfway through if nothing was disturbed? Why were notes destroyed, cameras restricted, access denied? Each detail, incomplete, becomes a spark for darker imagination. This is where psychology folds into geology. The more remote the setting, the more convincing the suspicion. Antarctica is as unreachable as the moon for most people, a horizon we cannot test ourselves. To imagine rival nations uniting only for environmental protection feels banal. To imagine them uniting because something incredible lurks below, that feels dramatic, charged, worthy of such unlikely cooperation. This is the appeal of global conspiracy. It doesn't demand proof. It demands that listeners believe the absence of conflict is itself the trace of something extraordinary. Skeptics respond with cool explanations. Satellites blur because of geometry. Flights bend for safety. Stations align because wind would bury them otherwise. The treaty, they say, is one of humanity's few victories, proof that not every frontier must be consumed by war. These counters matter, but the difficulty lies not in their accuracy, but in their inability to quiet longing for mystery. Once imagination walks into a blank space like Antarctica, it rarely retreats. Even the most rational maps hesitate before the pole, leaving shadows in the memory of anyone who studies them. The truth, perhaps, is that both elements coexist. Sensitive research does require secrecy, experiments protected, wildlife undisturbed, bases unvandalized. Yet secrecy has its side effect. Once walls are raised, once gates are locked, the mind rushes to fill the gaps with images it cannot confirm. Supporters whisper of radiant cities buried in caverns, of hangars hiding crafts we mislabel as UFOs, of survivors from long-lost continents watching in quiet. Critics reply that life in research camps is cold, tedious, and far from fantastical. 2 kitchens, a library, and endless snow. Nothing more exotic than frostbite. Still, the whisper rings louder than the counter. The allure also grows from the historical echoes already threaded through this ice. It holds Nazi rumours, Highjump's abrupt ending, Cold War listening posts, and the constant trade of half-redacted documents. Each piece alone may dissolve under scrutiny. Together, though, they build an architecture of uncertainty, like bones of a cathedral rising unfinished from snow. In that structure, even silence becomes evidence. Absence itself is testimony. Fear and fascination entwine until disbelief feels like blindness, and doubt alone feels like vision. Some suggest Antarctica's inability to explain itself is the key. Limited access, endless storms, months of darkness. The continent resists the gaze. Humans rarely accept barriers without invention. The harder it is to see, the easier it becomes to populate with hidden masters or buried knowledge. Environmental restrictions may be only science's way of preservation, yet cloaked in secrecy, they echo like guards at some unseen door. The sound of radio chatter in 1959 still hangs thin in the air, a reminder of nations bending not to war, but to silence. And perhaps this is the most haunting truth. The silence has become stronger than any discovery. Whether governments protect fragile ecosystems or extraordinary ruins, the effect is the same. Ordinary activities cloaked in secret create myths grander than any hidden temple or buried facility could provide. The very act of not explaining, of locking doors, has ensured Antarctica's place at the centre of suspicion. It is a continent where secrecy itself has grown into the most enduring legend. Each year, new expeditions leave, cameras rolling, drones scanning ridges, yet the questions never vanish. The shadows on digital maps remain unclear, flight restrictions stay in place, and treaty rules remain set as they were in 1959. Silence reinforces silence, layer upon layer, like ice itself. To trust in official reasoning is to accept that some mysteries are born only from limitation. To suspect deeper meanings is to lean into what imagination will always provide. Another story beneath the snow. In the end, Antarctica speaks without voice. Every storm crack, every blurred image, every withdrawn expedition, all of it mutters but never utters. Whether it hides vaults of wisdom, caches of weapons, or nothing beyond wind and stone, the evidence cannot surpass the power of muteness. The most unsettling realization is that cover-ups need not contain treasures at all. The secrecy itself becomes the relic, the artifact, the unmelting shard of myth. Nothing revealed could outweigh the weight of what was never said, and so the frozen south continues to lie in wait, an expanse transformed by absence. Governments call it preservation, critics call it concealment. Between these perspectives, a hush stretches from sea to sky. In that hush, imagination builds its radiant corridors and locked gates, far more enduring than anything carved in stone. Government silence has become the loudest voice, and it speaks only of mystery. Antarctica slips between fact and fable with no effort at all, leaving open the thought that somewhere below all that ice, explanations lie. Inaccessible, and perhaps intentionally so. The click of recording equipment in 1906 breaks the quiet of a San Francisco laboratory. Outside, the city struggles under the ruins left by one of the worst earthquakes in American memory. Inside, scientists look down at spools of paper traced with jagged lines. For the first time, they recognize what these lines truly hold. Not just the record of destruction, but patterns that reveal how vibrations travel deep through the planet itself. Each mark across the paper is the Earth speaking, waves bending and reflecting within stone unseen by human eyes. What was once devastation becomes a map, and suddenly the planet's hidden structure begins to take on shape. At the dawn of the 20th century, seismology shifted from cataloguing tremors to peering inward like an X-ray. Instruments refined after 1906 caught the subtle difference between waves that rolled through stone and those that faltered at unseen barriers. As records gathered, it became clear the Earth was not uniform inside. Some waves, called P waves, moved easily through solids and liquids, bending as if crossing boundaries of changing density. Others, S waves, could only cross solid ground, vanishing when they reached something molten. These observations built a framework that suggested our planet held not a cavity, but a layer of liquid far below. The revelation was unsettling for anyone clinging to hollow interior theories. Scientists saw what they called shadow zones, regions of the Earth where seismic energy simply failed to appear. The absence of S waves beyond a particular depth proved that they struck a liquid barrier and stopped dead. P waves, while not blocked, curved dramatically, slowed and bent as though swimming through a heavier substance. This repeating pattern wasn't random, but exact in its boundaries. It told of a liquid outer core, spherical and immense, wrapped around a still deeper solid centre. To thinkers in the Hollow Earth tradition, who imagined vast chambers, the discovery was catastrophic. Here was the first decisive blow. Beneath us lay not emptiness, but vibrational silence speaking loudly of molten metal. The discovery was made more vivid through simple analogy. Picture how a beam of light bends when it passes from air into water. The beam shifts, its path altered by a sudden change in density. Seismic waves behave the same way at the boundaries between crust, mantle, outer core and inner core. Some flowed smoothly, others broke and scattered. By measuring the deflection, scientists pieced together the sizes of each layer. The precision was astonishing. Earth was mapped without a single descent beneath its crust, the story drawn purely from tremors echoing through rock. To many, it was proof that the interior was thick with structure, not void. Gravity offered further confirmation. Sensitive instruments showed that Earth's mass carried far too much density to be hollow. Calculations fit neatly with an iron-rich core layered beneath lighter rock above. Gravitational anomalies, minute variations in pull across continents and oceans, lined up with geological expectations of mountain roots, mantle convection, and the fluid outer core predicted by seismology. No gaping pockets of empty space appeared in the data. Instead, everything matched the expectation of a compact, heavy planet. This was not anecdote or speculation, but mathematics and measurement stacking into one another until a singular picture emerged. By the mid-century, another force joined the story: plate tectonics. Once controversial, it became the unifying language of modern geology. Earthquakes, volcanoes, trenches, and mountain ranges all found explanation in vast plates shuffling across a hot but solid mantle. The plates collided or spread apart, their boundaries responsible for most of Earth's violence. The theory required solidity and interaction. Hollow chambers could not support such motion. A planet riddled with caverns would collapse under its own weight. Instead, the layered model allowed heat from the interior to drive convection currents, slowly dragging continents like rafts on a hidden sea of stone. As instruments sharpened, seismic tomography added clarity during the 1960s and after. Much like a CT scan builds a body's internal image from beams of radiation, tomography built the Earth's interior from the travel time of the waves. It not only showed major divisions, the crust, mantle, outer core, inner core, but also smaller anomalies, subducted slabs sinking into the mantle, rising plumes of heat feeding volcanic chains. These internal portraits revealed intricacy but no yawning caverns. Every structure carried weight, density, and predictable behaviour. With each added layer of data, the vision of a hollow planet slipped further from scientific reach. Yet anomalies remained. Small irregularities in vibration, echoes not easily explained. Believers seized on them as evidence for hidden chambers science preferred to ignore. Supporters suggested unexplained delays or faint repeating pulses pointed toward voids, perhaps shielded from easy detection. Mainstream scientists dismissed these as noise in the data, imperfections in instruments, or variations in mineral composition. But in conspiracy circles, dismissal itself became fuel. If official channels said errors, then perhaps they masked truths. This tug-of-war widened until it was less about data itself than about the trust one placed in those interpreting it. One human-scale image holds weight here. Picture a technician bent over a seismograph, pencil in hand marking vibrations drawn overnight. The lines climb, dip and disappear into silence before resuming. For the technician, it is measurement, wave paths cutting through hidden layers. For those outside the discipline, it might look like opportunity, blank spots filled with speculation more than math. That contrast, the scientist's quiet precision versus the dreamer's yearning, kept the Hollow Earth alive despite increasingly decisive evidence against it. In those intimate moments of reading traces, two worlds existed side by side, hard data and myth. By the 1960s, consensus was locked. Earth's interior was not hollow but layered and dense, a system of crust, mantle and cores, each performing clear mechanical roles. The models accounted for earthquakes, volcanoes and continental drift. They aligned with gravity readings and even nuclear physics, which relied on precise density estimates of the planet when modelling neutrino behaviour through matter. The case, scientifically, was closed. But culture had already moved on. Hollow Earth had become something else, less a testable claim, more a legend woven into conspiracy, literature and spiritual teaching. Disproof mattered little when the story had already taken root in imagination. The persistence of myth in the face of evidence reveals more about imagination than geology. Once a notion shifts from hypothesis to folklore, it arms itself against data. Arguments become symbols. A believer might hear seismic readings as riddles rather than closure, claiming science interprets too narrowly what remains incomplete. Critics counter that such resistance to overwhelming evidence is a refusal of reality itself. Still, the myth endures, its core no longer geological but psychological, a yearning for passageways, for guardians hidden in shaded caverns, for survival chambers beneath floods and fire. Ideas seismographs were never meant to erase. Consider the interplay now, a planet mapped with tools that leave no empty halls, and yet a culture where books, films and whispers keep painting the interior as vibrant and alive. Science built an image of iron flowing around a solid centre. Stories built radiant kingdoms, escape routes and secret bases. Both occupy the same planet, but different layers of consciousness. Where waves bent, myth stayed straight. Where instruments confirmed solidity, dreams unfurled tunnels. Each persists, not arguing in the same room, but talking past one another entirely. What makes this more striking is how complete the map grew. Today, seismic networks lace across continents, recording patterns with split-second precision. Earthquakes on one side of the globe reach detectors on the other, their data feeding vast computational models. The outcome is consistency. Every wave, every bend, every echo fits together as it should. Findings repeat across decades and instruments. There is no patchwork of uncertainty large enough to hide realms beneath. For scientists, there is closure. For seekers of the hidden, closure itself is only a challenge, the walls of explanation tempting them to dig further. Hollow Earth then became untethered from geology. By the time tomography scanned the inner core, the myth had adapted into something harder to pin down. It now mixed with tales of Nazi Antarctic bases, Shambhala, and UFOs. No amount of density calculations or seismic shadows could end such threads, because they had moved outside the arena of measurable claim. They had become cultural phenomenon, held alive by longing for the undiscovered. The seismic proof didn't kill the myth, but sharpened its boundary, science on one side, speculation on the other. A question lingers in that divide. Why do hard instruments fail to dismantle certain mysteries? The answer may lie as much in psychology as in physics. Myths satisfy an appetite facts cannot reach, the desire for hidden realms, protective refuges, or higher knowledge. A world with no secret corridors feels bare, exposed to chaos without shelter. A hollow earth became less about geology than about comfort, a mirror for resilience and hidden hope. When official voices say no cavities exist, fascination doesn't collapse, it simply retreats to folklore, ready to surface wherever the next anomaly appears. Across generations, the seismograph's hum carried authority, yet its authority competed with the whisper of legend in fireside tales, in novels like Jules Verne's, in pulp magazines, and eventually in online forums. Each era reshaped the story, even as data stacked higher. The myth flourished not despite disproof, but because disproof didn't touch its real domain. Hollow Earth persisted because it had stopped asking to be fact and had become narrative fuel, a deep well of imagery and rebellion. Instruments could close the case. Culture chose not to follow. So here we are with a map of Earth's interior etched sharper than ever, mantle plumes rising, cores spinning, slabs subducting silently into heat. No vast hollows, no thriving inner continents. Everything solid, layered, dense. And still, beyond the measurements, whispers speak of what might hide. The myth breathes through those whispers, a survival independent of data. The seismograph speaks in lines of proof. The imagination answers in lines of story. Between the two lies not contradiction, but an enduring question. Why does fact so often fail to close the book on wonder? This question circles back to the delicate moment in 1906 when paper reels carried their first decisive hint. A technician bent over inked traces thought in physics. Another mind, years later, might think in metaphors, the gaps in the lines as gaps in the earth itself. The same mark can be read two ways, depending on what one longs to find. That tension has lingered a century. The science is settled. The story is not. And perhaps that is the more telling revelation. Truth in measurement does not always end truth in memory. The layers of Earth have been charted, yet myth tunnels on through culture, untouched by the weight above. One imagines the stillness after the quake when the instruments quiet, the technicians leave their tables, and the night closes on rolls of traced vibration. Those lines remain, drawn delicate across paper, whispering two interpretations at once. To the geologist, they are proof of solidity. To the dreamer, they are space enough to imagine doors. The myth turned immune, not because it withstood science, but because it walked beyond science's reach, into the very landscape of desire itself. Stone held firm, but the story continued sliding freely beneath it, carving its own passage as deep as belief would carry. A child's voice carries softly through a dim bedroom, words rising and falling in a bedtime rhythm. On the page is a tale of Hades and his shadowed halls. Another room, half a world away, echoes with a Hopi elder speaking of the ant people who once sheltered humanity beneath stone during storms that swallowed the surface. Across the mountains of Tibet, chants describe Shambhala not as dream but as kingdom, brilliant and out of reach. Each story carries the same impossible shape, worlds just beneath our feet, hidden yet alive. These voices never spoke to each other, separated by oceans, yet they harmonize across centuries. That harmony leaves an unsettling puzzle for anthropologists and storytellers alike. How did cultures without clear contact imagine such similar depths? If one voice spoke of the dead beneath soil, and another whispered of radiant chambers filled with light, what thread binds them? Some suggest a shared human need for refuge when the surface threatens with fire or flood. Others dismiss this as coincidence, arguing that underground space is simply the most natural canvas for human fears. Still, the alignment is sharp, as if humanity carried a memory far older than written language. The stories are double-edged. These underworlds offer promise and terror in equal measure. They are sanctuaries where people find safety when catastrophe strikes, and they are tombs where the dead gather in eternal night. That tension feels more than myth. It feels psychological, a blueprint of longing and dread kept alive in every culture. To enter the underworld is either to be protected or punished, to emerge wiser or never emerge at all. This duality explains why the stories have lasted. They are mirrors of what each generation fears the most and hopes the most, set just out of reach beneath stone. Modern psychology hints at why people might cling to these ideas. Belief in hidden worlds can soften the sharp edge of anxiety. Facing a life where disasters strike without reason, wars destroy stability, and cultures collapse without warning. The idea that somewhere wisdom survives is comforting. If surface history is a series of endings, then the myth of an underground refuge whispers of continuity. Some studies point out that such belief operates as a coping mechanism, an internal promise that no matter how bad the surface becomes, not everything is lost. Even if it is hidden, hope has a home. That quiet reassurance easily slips into suspicion when people watch the movements of authority. Governments speak with secrecy, institutions hold data back, and the natural mistrust this builds needs a story to explain it. Supporters suggest underground worlds provide that frame. If the surface is controlled, then beneath it may lie escape, rebellion, or simply a place authority cannot touch. The lore of hidden chambers becomes more attractive in times of censorship and politics, when the idea of something the powerful cannot reach feels like a form of sanctuary itself. For some, believing in it is rebellion against voices that wield too much control. Culture has recycled the tale again and again, shifting it toward new anxieties without ever breaking its shape. In the 19th century, Jules Verne turned theories of concentric shells into a romantic journey. Through pulp magazines of the early 20th century, underground kingdoms became a backdrop for peril and discovery. In modern cinema, beasts rise from inner sanctuaries and explorers stumble into landscapes where prehistoric life never died. Each generation bends the myth toward its own shadows. Cold War tensions, ecological disaster, technological fear. The familiar shell of the hollow earth becomes a stage for whatever remains unresolved. Once fiction wraps itself around a myth, it becomes harder to dismiss outright. Stories that begin as entertainment feel half real when shifted through repetition. A reader finishing Verne could not easily draw the line between science and dream. A modern viewer leaving a theatre might feel the same. Sociologists note this cycle. The line between fact and speculation blurs when art recycles myth with enough conviction. And when each new story insists "what if?", audiences begin to see the repetition as something more than invention. Stories prepare the mind to believe. They make the impossible incrementally familiar. If science closed the geological door, these cultural doors kept opening. Hollow Earth stopped being geography and started functioning as mirror. What do we want reflected there? Sometimes it is benevolent beings holding knowledge we lost. Sometimes it's controllers hidden out of ordinary sight shaping our path. The mirror shifts with each viewer, reflecting fear one night and longing the next. That adaptability, psychologists suggest, keeps Hollow Earth alive where other discarded theories fade. It does not need to be true to be useful. What matters is how it reflects the hopes or grievances of those who believe. Entertainment keeps that mirror polished. Every decade offers a new wave of books, comics, films, and even video games centered on worlds beneath. These iterations keep the story relevant, moving it into spaces where explanation and imagination merge. Critics counter that studios recycle only because it sells, but the economic motive survives on deeper need. Audiences come because the myth touches something enduring. A story pulling open the ground and revealing hidden realms is never stale. It feels like a door we still want to test. The repetition alone gives the impossible an air of plausibility. Perhaps this explains best why, in spite of seismographs and satellite maps, the Hollow Earth survives, It is not evidence that makes it enduring, but need. Humanity requires mysteries that do not easily fade, promises of worlds not yet discovered, and comforts that catastrophe does not erase everything. In that role, a theory once dismissed by geology grows into a cultural structure. It lasts not because it is real, but because it is useful, an anchor for meaning when the surface feels fragile. Belief often sustains longer than truth. The myth does not break, it adapts. Still, there is a quiet consequence to consider. When people turn suspicion toward governments and institutions, darkness beneath the earth becomes the natural canvas. Global treaties sealing off Antarctica, blurry polar images, accidents in caves, every silence reads like strategy. Critics dismiss this as misinterpretation, yet the absence of transparency is powerful material. The less revealed, the louder the imagination becomes. Secrets above ground strengthen the narrative of secrets below. And in this atmosphere, Hollow Earth becomes more than geology. It becomes protest, rebellion cast into stone. Where evidence fails, distrust fills the gaps. This mythology also carries a deeper reflection of human duality. Inside Earth's imagined chambers dwell both teachers and tyrants, one promising guidance, the other domination. Supporters suggest this is less about real beings and more about projection. Each generation writes its own fears and aspirations onto the underground blank page. In times of war, hidden oppressors rule the caverns. In times of hope, radiant guides whisper truths preserved for the worthy. The myth is shape-shifting because humans are shape-shifting in what they need, and that ability to hold opposite visions within one legend keeps it endlessly alive. For anthropologists, these parallels across cultures and eras are evidence of something universal. The idea of thresholds common to humanity, a cave mouth, a sinkhole, a polar stretch that feels like a doorway, holds fascination that never wanes. Humans place gateways at the world's edge or beneath daily ground because they embody possibility. One step in could mean transformation, annihilation, or contact with something greater than ourselves. That pull toward thresholds explains why underworlds appear in Greece, in Mesoamerica, in Asia, and among desert tribes living far apart. The motif belongs as much to psychology as to folklore. Even cognitive science has language for this pull. Believers often show confirmation bias, seeking material that supports the legend, ignoring material that dismantles it. They also reveal a human tendency to find patterns, even in randomness. Both biases are strong when paired with stories already embedded in culture. If a cave echoes strangely, it is voice, not rock. If a photo blurs near the poles, it is concealment, not error. The myth thrives on these biases because they cement what is already yearned for. Proof of other worlds, no matter how faint the signal. When we trace the arc from early myths to modern conspiracy communities, the picture widens. Hollow Earth has never been only about geology. It is an emotional map charted across generations. It contains humanity's terror of death and its hope of survival, its suspicion toward control, and its longing for escape. When institutions fail, when knowledge feels uncertain, the mind lowers its gaze toward the ground and imagines corridors still unwritten. That image remains useful because it adapts to whatever anxieties are fresh in the surface world. The earth below becomes both echo and answer. So the hollow earth endures, not in stone or seismic layers, but in cultural imagination. It has been repainted for centuries, sometimes with science, sometimes with fiction, sometimes with suspicion. Each layer alters it, but none erases it. If asked why such tales remain powerful against all counter-evidence, even skeptics may admit the narrative fills a space no fact can. It promises more than explanation. It promises mystery still unsolved. And while geology buries roots deep in density and molten core, myth keeps hollow chambers alive because humans keep needing them. What survives isn't the theory but the hunger. That hunger may say less about Earth's geology than about our own interior. These imagined kingdoms beneath our feet may reflect not true tunnels but true absence, the hollow places in human meaning. When cultures whisper of radiant courts or shadowed vaults, they externalize the indistinct yearning inside. Belief marks the map of inner landscapes more reliably than soil or stone. And when myths insist knowledge waits below, perhaps they mark only how far we will dig for mystery. The passage is inward as much as down, and the searching, like the story, never closes. The hollow earth has shifted shapes for centuries, myth, science, conspiracy and story, but its persistence says more about us than about the planet itself. When cultures across the world imagine hidden cities, radiant kingdoms, or forgotten refuges in the stone below, they show a need as old as language. We have always looked for sanctuaries beyond reach, places where catastrophe cannot follow and where wisdom waits untouched. Whether they picture luminous beings, Atlantean survivors, or tunnels that circle the globe, the meaning rests less in geography than in longing. What draws us isn't proof, but possibility. Some whisper that if science maps every layer, imagination still supplies hidden cracks. Others dismiss the tales as metaphor, yet even so they provide a mirror. To explore the hollow earth is to measure our hunger for mystery, the sense that something essential waits just outside our charts. It offers comfort that secrets still exist in a world relentlessly surveyed from sky to seabed. Maybe the question was never about entrances at the poles or caverns beneath mountains. Maybe the hollow earth isn't about what lies below at all, but about how far we're willing to dig for wonder